The distant thunder of hooves against prairie soil was what woke Clara Jensen from her restless slumber, a slumber that had been filled with the same nightmares that had haunted her for the past 2 years. It was 1873, and the unforgiving Kansas sun was already creeping through the threadbare curtains of her small homestead cabin. Clara pushed herself up from her bed, her heart racing. Visitors meant danger. In her 26 years of life, she'd learned that lesson the hard way. She moved quickly to the wooden chest at the foot of her bed, retrieving the Colt revolver her father had given her before he died. The metal was cool against her palm as she approached the window, keeping to the side to peek out without being seen. A lone rider approached on a chestnut stallion, a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten hat pulled low over his face. The stranger reined his horse to a stop about 50 paces from her cabin, as if sensing her caution. He dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Clara's grip tightened on her revolver. A strange man on her property could mean only trouble. Since James had died, men from town had been circling like vultures, thinking a widow with a small ranch would be desperate for help or a husband. "Hello, the house," the stranger called, his voice carrying across the morning air. "I don't mean any harm, madam." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. From this distance, she could see he was smiling, a wide, friendly grin that made her stomach knot. That smile so similar to the one James Harrington had given her the day he'd come to collect on her father's debt. The same smile he'd worn when he told her the only way to pay was to become his wife. The same smile he'd worn just before his fists came down. Clara stepped away from the window, pressing her back against the wall. She hadn't trusted a smile since James had died 2 years ago. Not one. "I'm just looking for work, madam," the stranger called again. "Name's Wade Hargrave. Heard in town you might need help with your cattle." Clara closed her eyes briefly. She did need help desperately. The small herd her father had left her was her only livelihood, and with spring roundup coming, she couldn't manage alone. But trusting a stranger, a man with a charming smile, she might as well put a gun to her own head. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and stepped onto the porch, keeping the revolver visible at her side. "I didn't ask for help in town," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whoever sent you is mistaken." The man, Wade, stood with his hat in his hands, that smile still on his face, though it had faltered slightly at the sight of her weapon. "No one sent me specifically, madam," he replied. "Just heard talk that the Jensen place was run by a widow who might need an extra hand with roundup coming." Clara's jaw tightened. "And I suppose you thought I'd be grateful enough to pay whatever exorbitant wage you ask. Or perhaps you had other forms of payment in mind." The smile disappeared completely then, replaced by a look of genuine shock. "Madam, he started, then cleared his throat. "I'm just looking for honest work. Been trailing cattle up from Texas and looking to settle somewhere for a spell." Something in his eyes made Clara hesitate. There was no malice there, no hidden agenda she could detect, but she'd been fooled before. "I can't pay much," she said finally, calculating quickly. She did need help, and soon. "And you'll sleep in the barn." The smile returned, smaller but somehow more genuine. "That's more than fair, madam. I'm a good hand with cattle. Been doing it since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And I'm handy with repairs, too, if you've got things that need fixing." Clara nodded curtly. "We'll try it for a week. If I'm not satisfied with your work, you leave without argument. And Mr. Hargrave?" She raised the revolver slightly. "I sleep with this beside me, just so we're clear." Wade's smile didn't falter, but his eyes grew serious. "Crystal clear, Miss Jensen. I respect a woman who knows how to protect herself." He placed his hat back on his head. "Where would you like me to start?" Clara hesitated, then gestured toward the barn. "You can put your horse in the empty stall. Then the north fence needs mending. The tools are in the barn." Wade nodded, tipped his hat, and led his horse toward the barn without another word. Clara watched him go, her heart still racing. What had she done, letting a stranger stay on her land? But what choice did she have? She lowered the revolver and went back inside to dress properly for the day's work. Through the window, she could see Wade leading his horse into the barn, that easy smile still on his face as he spoke softly to the animal. Clara turned away. She wouldn't be fooled by a smile again, not ever. The morning passed in relative silence. Clara busied herself with chores around the cabin, constantly aware of Wade's presence on her property. She watched from a distance as he repaired the fence with efficient, practiced movements. By midday, he had completed more work than she had expected. When noon came, Clara reluctantly prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. She stepped onto the porch and rang the small bell that hung there, a remnant from her father's time, when they'd had ranch hands to call in for meals. Wade approached from the fence line, wiping sweat from his brow. He stopped a respectful distance from the porch. "The fence is coming along well, Miss Jensen," he said. "Should have it finished by sundown." Clara nodded. "There's food if you're hungry." She gestured to the small table she'd set up on the porch, unwilling to invite him inside her home just yet. "Much obliged," Wade said, removing his hat before climbing the steps. They ate in silence, Clara stealing glances at her new hired hand. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with crow's feet just beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. His hands, though strong and calloused, handled the simple tableware with surprising gentleness. "This is mighty fine cornbread, Miss Jensen," Wade said, breaking the silence. Clara gave a curt nod. "My mother's recipe." Wade seemed to sense her reluctance to engage and focused on his meal. When he finished, he thanked her politely, then returned to work without prompting. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself watching Wade more than attending to her own chores. There was something in the way he moved, confident but not cocky, strong but not intimidating, that was distinctly different from James or any of the men who had come sniffing around after his death. By sunset, as promised, the north fence was fully repaired. Wade returned to the barn, caring for his own horse, and then tending to Clara's 2 workhorses without being asked. Clara prepared another simple meal, this time inviting Wade to eat at the small table on the porch again. "The cattle look healthy," Wade commented as they ate. "How many head are you running?" 43, Clara replied, down from 60 last year. Lost some to rustlers, some to winter. Wade nodded. "That's hard, but 43 is a good start. With proper management, you could be back up to 60 by next spring." Clara eyed him suspiciously. "And I suppose you know all about proper management?" To her surprise, Wade didn't take offense. "Worked as a foreman on a spread in the Panhandle for 5 years. Before that, I was driving cattle up from Texas to Kansas since I was 17. His smile appeared again, this time with a touch of self-deprecation. "I know enough to know how much I don't know, Miss Jensen. But cattle? Yes, I understand cattle." Something in his straightforward manner made Clara want to believe him, but trusting had been her downfall before. "We'll see," was all she said. Later, after Wade had retired to the barn, Clara sat alone by the fireplace, her father's old ledger open on her lap. The numbers didn't lie. Without help for the spring roundup and the small cattle drive to the nearest railhead, she'd lose the ranch by winter. One bad hired hand, and she could lose it even sooner. Clara closed the ledger with a sigh. One day at a time, she would watch Wade Hargrave closely. At the first sign of trouble, he'd be gone and she'd find another way to save her father's legacy. She had to. The next week passed in much the same fashion. Wade proved himself to be as good with cattle as he claimed. He worked from sunrise to sunset, mending fences, checking on the herd, and making repairs around the barn and corral that Clara hadn't even mentioned needed doing. Each evening, they shared a meal on the porch. Wade attempted conversation, his smile ready and warm, but Clara kept her responses brief. Still, as the days passed, she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing the way the sun had lightened streaks in his brown hair, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how his hands were both strong and gentle with the animals. On the 7th day, the day she'd agreed to decide whether he would stay, Clara rode out with Wade to check on a group of cattle grazing in the far pasture. They rode side by side in silence, the spring air warm around them. "There's a stream just beyond that rise," Clara said, breaking the silence. "The cattle gather there in the afternoon." Wade nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with practiced ease. "Good grazing land you have here. Your father chose well." Clara felt a pang at the mention of her father. "He built this place from nothing. Came out here with my mother when Kansas was still just a territory." "You must miss them," Wade said softly. Clara stiffened, unused to discussing her feelings with anyone, let alone a man she barely knew. "They've been gone a long time." Wade seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "About our arrangement, has my work been satisfactory?" Clara considered him. In truth, Wade had exceeded her expectations. He was skilled, hard-working, and had respected her boundaries completely. "It has," she admitted. "If you want to stay on through the roundup and drive, I'd be willing to discuss terms." Wade's smile bloomed, genuine and warm. "I'd like that very much, Miss Jensen." Something fluttered in Clara's chest, something she immediately suppressed. It was just relief at finding competent help, nothing more. They crested the rise, and the view of the stream came into sight along with 3 men on horseback, driving several of Clara's cattle away from her property. "Rustlers," Wade said, his voice low and hard. Clara's hand went to the rifle in her saddle scabbard, but Wade held up a hand. "Let me try to talk to them first," he said. "Could be a misunderstanding." Before Clara could object, Wade urged his horse forward, calling out to the men. "Hello there. I believe you've got Miss Jensen's cattle." The 3 men turned, and Clara's blood ran cold. She recognized them men from town who had worked for James, men who had tried to pressure her into selling after his death. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the largest of the men called back. "These cattle are payment for debts owed." Clara rode up beside Wade, her rifle now in her hands. "I owe you nothing, Silas Quinn. Those are my cattle, and you're stealing them." Silas sneered. "James borrowed money from me before he died. Debts passed to you, widow." Wade's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert. "Miss Jensen says there's no debt. I suggest you leave those cattle and ride out." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly assessing the situation. It was 3 against 2, but Clara's rifle was steady in her hands, and Wade's calm confidence seemed to give them pause. "This ain't over," Silas growled, but he signaled to his companions, and they reluctantly turned their horses, leaving the cattle behind. As they rode away, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said to Wade, the words feeling strange on her tongue. Wade's smile was grim. "They'll be back. Men like that don't give up easily." Clara nodded, a chill running through her despite the warm day. "I know. They've been trying to run me off since James died. They work for Edwin Mercer now. He wants to buy up all the small ranches in the area." Wade's brow furrowed. "I've heard of Mercer. Has a reputation all the way to Texas." He looked at Clara, his eyes serious. "You should have told me about this threat." Clara raised her chin. "I've been handling it." Wade's expression softened. "I don't doubt that for a minute, Miss Jensen, but now you're not handling it alone." Something in his words, in the way he said them, without presumption, without trying to take over, made Clara's carefully constructed walls tremble slightly. "We should get these cattle back to the main herd," she said, deflecting the moment of vulnerability. Wade nodded, and they set to work, their earlier conversation about his continued employment seemingly confirmed by the shared crisis. As they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Clara found herself stealing glances at Wade's profile. For the first time in 2 years, she wondered if perhaps not all men were like James, if perhaps there were some whose smiles held no hidden threats. The thought was as terrifying as it was liberating. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn, her mind still replaying the confrontation with Silas and his men. Wade had been right, they would be back, and likely with more men. The spring roundup was less than 2 weeks away, and if she couldn't get her cattle to market, she'd lose everything. She dressed quickly and went into the kitchen to start breakfast. To her surprise, there was already coffee brewing on the stove, and Wade was nowhere to be seen. Through the window, she could see his horse was gone from the corral. Anxiety knotted in her stomach. Had he left? Had yesterday's trouble scared him off? Or worse, had he been working with Silas all along, gaining her trust only to betray her? Clara was reaching for her rifle when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She peered out the window to see Wade returning, another man riding beside him. She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, as they dismounted. "Morning, Miss Jensen," Wade called, seemingly unfazed by her weapon. "Hope you don't mind, but I rode into town at first light and found us some help." He gestured to his companion, an older man with a weathered face and a gray streaked beard. "This is Sam Tucker, best wrangler in 3 counties, according to the barkeep at the Golden Spur." The older man touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, Wade here says you've got rustler troubles and a roundup coming. I've been looking for work since the Holland ranch sold last month." Clara looked between the 2 men, suspicion warring with the practical knowledge that she needed more help. "I can't afford to pay 2 hired hands much," she said finally. Sam shrugged. "Wade mentioned that. Said the pay is fair and the boss lady is fairer. That's good enough for me. Been workit's cattle since before you were born, madam. Don't need riches, just honest work." Clara shot a look at Wade, who was watching her with that now familiar smile that never seemed to push for anything. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but the same terms apply. Any trouble and you're both gone." Sam nodded seriously. "Yes, madam. No trouble from me." Wade's smile widened. "I took the liberty of picking up some supplies in town, too. Flour, coffee, salt pork. Figure with 2 hands to feed, you might need extra." Clara blinked, surprised at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said, the words coming easier this time. "There's coffee on. You can show Mr. Tucker where he'll be sleeping. And then we need to move the herd from the south pasture today." Wade nodded. and the two men headed toward the barn, already discussing the best approach to moving the cattle. Clara watched them go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. For the first time since James's death, she felt something like hope. Over the next week, the ranch transformed with the addition of Sam and Wade's tireless work. The cattle were gathered from the far pastures, fences were reinforced, and preparations for the roundup began in earnest. Each evening, the three of them would share a meal on the porch, and Clara found herself gradually participating more in the conversations. Sam was a natural storyteller, with tales from his 40 years of ranch work that often had Wade laughing and even brought reluctant smiles to Clara's face. Wade, she noticed, always seemed to be watching for those small smiles, as if each one was a victory. And perhaps each smile felt like a small crack in the armor she'd built around herself. 10 days after Wade's arrival, they were working together in the corral, preparing the horses for the roundup that would begin the following day. Sam had ridden to a neighboring ranch to borrow an extra cutting horse they'd need. "Miss Jensen," Wade said as they worked side by side, adjusting a saddle, "I've been meaning to ask, how did you come to be running this ranch alone?" Clara's hands stilled on the leather. She rarely spoke of her past, especially the painful parts with James. But Wade had proven himself trustworthy, and somehow the thought of sharing the burden felt right. "My parents died of fever when I was 20, she began, her voice quiet but steady. "My father left me the ranch, but I had little experience running it. A man named James Harrington offered to help. He was charming, confident, said he'd teach me everything I needed to know." Clara focused on the saddle, not meeting Wade's eyes. 6 months later, we were married. By the end of the first year, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. James was interested in a ranch, not me. When I didn't run it the way he wanted it, she paused, the old pain surfacing. He had ways of showing his displeasure. Wade was very still beside her, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. "He hurt you," he said, not a question but a statement, his voice tight. Clara nodded. "For 3 years. Then one night he was thrown from his horse while drunk, broke his neck." She finally looked up, meeting Wade's eyes. Everyone in town thought I should be devastated. Instead, I felt free for the first time in years. Wade's expression was a complex mixture of anger, compassion, and something deeper she couldn't name. "I understand now," he said softly, "why you don't trust easily, why a man's smile means danger to you." Clara looked away again, uncomfortable with how clearly he seemed to see her. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long," Wade countered gently. "Some wounds take years to heal, Miss Jensen." The tenderness in his voice made her throat tight. No one had acknowledged her pain before, not the women in town who had gossiped about her tragic loss, not the men who had come sniffing around afterward, seeing only a vulnerable widow with land. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to elaborate further. Wade nodded, seeming to understand what she couldn't say. They returned to their work in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Clara had shown him her deepest wound, and he hadn't flinched away. That night, she lay awake long after retiring, thinking about Wade's reaction to her story. There had been no pity in his eyes, only understanding and a quiet anger on her behalf. In just over a week, he had somehow become someone she trusted, not completely, not yet, but more than anyone since her parents' deaths. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. The roundup began at dawn the next morning. Clara, Wade, and Sam worked seamlessly together, gathering the scattered cattle from the far reaches of the ranch. Two neighbors Clara was on good terms with sent their sons to help young men of 17 and 19 who were eager to prove themselves. By midday, they had gathered nearly 30 head, with another dozen or so still to locate. They stopped by a stream to water the horses and eat a quick meal of jerky and hardtack. "We're making good progress," Wade said, squatting beside Clara as she refilled her canteen. "Should have the entire herd together by tomorrow noon, if the weather holds." Clara nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. The spring day had turned unexpectedly warm. "The sooner we get them to market, the better. I don't trust Mercer to leave us alone much longer." Wade's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that. The usual route to the railhead passes close to Mercer's property. Might be wiser to take the northern trail. It's longer by a day, but less likely to invite trouble." Clara considered this. The northern trail crosses Willow Creek. The spring melt makes it dangerous. Sam says it should be passable now. We can scout it tomorrow after we finish gathering the herd. Clara nodded her agreement, struck again by how easily Wade offered suggestions without assuming control. James would have simply announced his decision, expecting her to follow without question. "Miss Jensen! Mr. Hargrave!" Sam's urgent call interrupted their conversation. They both stood quickly as Sam rode toward them, his expression grim. "Riders coming from the east, 6 of them, and they don't look friendly." Clara's heart sank. Mercer's men. Wade was already moving toward his horse. "Get behind me and Sam. The boys can keep working with the cattle we've gathered." Clara bristled. "This is my ranch, Mr. Hargrave. I don't hide from threats." Wade looked at her, and to her surprise, he nodded. "Of course, but let me do the talking first." Clara hesitated, then nodded her agreement. They mounted up and rode to meet the approaching riders, with Sam flanking Clara's other side. As the riders drew closer, Clara recognized Silas Quinn at the lead, with 5 rough-looking men behind him. They halted their horses about 20 paces away. "Afternoon, Jensen," Silas called, his tone mockingly cordial. "I see you've hired some help. Won't make a difference." "What do you want, Quinn?" Clara demanded. "Mr. Mercer sent me with a message and an offer," Silas replied. "The message is that cattle rustling is becoming a real problem in these parts. Would be a shame if you lost more of your herd." His smile was nothing like Wade's. It was all teeth and malice. "The offer is $500 for your land. Take it and ride out. No one gets hurt." Wade urged his horse slightly forward. "That's mighty generous of Mr. Mercer, considering the Jensen spread is worth at least 5 times that amount." Silas's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Wade Hargrave, Miss Jensen's foreman." The claim surprised Clara, but she kept her expression neutral. They hadn't discussed any formal arrangement beyond the roundup. Silas spat on the ground. "Well, Hargrave, this ain't your fight. Miss Jensen here knows how things work in this county. Mercer gets what Mercer wants, one way or another." "Seems to me," Wade said, his voice deceptively casual, "that what Mercer wants is to intimidate honest ranchers into selling cheap. That's not how things work where I come from." One of Silas's men moved his hand toward his holster, but Silas stopped him with a gesture. "We're just delivering a message today, but Mr. Mercer's patience isn't endless." He looked directly at Clara. "You've got until the end of the month to accept the offer. After that, it gets withdrawn and things get unpleasant." "The answer is no," Clara said firmly. "This land was my father's and now it's mine. I'm not selling, not to Mercer, not to anyone." Silas's expression darkened. "Your choice, widow. But remember you were warned." He wheeled his horse around and the group rode away, dust rising in their wake. Once they were out of sight, Clara let out a shaky breath. Wade moved his horse alongside hers. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly on the reins. "I've had worse threats." Wade's eyes were serious. "They'll be back, and not just with threats next time." "I know," Clara said, "but I meant what I said. I'm not selling." Wade smiled then, a smile full of admiration that made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. "I never thought you would, but we need to be prepared. Finish the roundup quickly, get your cattle to market, and then make plans for when they come back." Sam rode up beside them. "I know some men, good men, who owe me favors. Could have them here in 3 days if you want." Clara looked between the two men, these virtual strangers who were offering to stand with her against Mercer's threats. "Why would you do this?" "You barely know me," Sam shrugged. "I've worked for men like Mercer before. They're bullies who need to be stood up to." Wade's answer was simpler. "Because it's the right thing to do." Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. She found none, just that same honest, open expression she'd come to recognize over the past days. "All right," she said finally. "Sam, send for your friends. Wade, we'll take the northern trail as you suggested." She straightened in her saddle, a new determination filling her. "And Mercer can go to hell." Wade's smile widened, and for the first time, Clara found herself wanting to return it. The urge surprised her, and she quickly turned her horse. "We should get back to work. There's still daylight left." As they rode back to the gathered cattle, Clara felt Wade's eyes on her. Something was changing between them, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. But now wasn't the time to examine those feelings. Now was the time to focus on saving her ranch. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. They finished gathering the herd, 41 head in total, 2 having been lost to predators over the winter, and prepared for the drive to the railhead in Ellsworth. Sam's friends, 3 hardened cowboys who greeted Clara with respectful nods, arrived on the evening of the second day. The plan was to leave at first light. Clara spent the night checking and rechecking supplies, too anxious to sleep. Around midnight, she stepped onto the porch for some air, surprised to find Wade sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of wood by the light of a small lantern. "You should be resting," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cool night air. Wade glanced up with a small smile. "Could say the same to you." Clara hesitated, then sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. "I've never led a cattle drive before," she admitted. "James always handled that part." Wade nodded, setting aside his whittling. "It's straightforward enough with a good team, and you've got that. Sam knows what he's doing, and his friends seem capable." "And you?" Clara asked. "You mentioned driving cattle up from Texas." Wade's smile turned reminiscent. "Started as a boy of 17. My father lost our farm in Tennessee after the war, so we came west. He died the first winter, and I signed on with a cattle outfit heading north." He looked out at the darkened landscape. "Been on the trail most of my life since then." "It must be lonely," Clara said softly, surprising herself with the observation. Wade glanced at her. "It can be, but there's a freedom to it that's hard to give up." He paused. "Or at least there was. Lately I've been thinking it might be nice to stop wandering, put down some roots." Something in his tone made Clara's heart beat faster. "Here?" she asked, the word barely audible. Wade met her eyes. "If there was a reason to stay." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Clara looked away first, overwhelmed by the emotions his simple words had evoked. "We should both get some rest," she said, standing abruptly. "Dawn comes early." Wade nodded, not pushing. "Good night, Miss Jensen." Clara paused at the door. "Clara," she said quietly. "You can call me Clara." Wade's smile in response was soft and warm. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Wade," she replied and hurried inside, her heart pounding like a young girl's. The cattle drive began at dawn, with Clara riding point alongside Wade, Sam bringing up the rear with two of his friends, and the remaining men flanking the herd. The northern trail was less used, winding through more rugged terrain, but Wade navigated it confidently. By midday, they had made good progress. The cattle moved steadily, and there had been no sign of Mercer's men. They stopped at a small stream to water the herd, and Clara found herself riding beside Wade as they watched the cattle drink. "You're a natural at this," Wade commented. "Most people need time to learn the rhythm of a drive." Clara felt a flush of pride at his words. "I watched my father run cattle drives when I was a girl. He let me ride with him sometimes, though my mother disapproved." Wade smiled. "They raised a strong woman." Clara looked away, unused to such direct compliments. "They did their best. My mother wanted me to marry well and move to a proper town. My father taught me to shoot, ride, and run a ranch." "Seems like you honor them both in your own way," Wade observed. "You've built a good life here, despite everything." Clara's expression sobered. "If I can keep it, Mercer won't give up easily." Wade's face grew serious. "No, he won't, but neither will you. And now you've got help." Their eyes met, and Clara felt that same connection from the night before, a growing bond that both comforted and frightened her. The moment was broken by Sam riding up. "Storm brewing to the west," he reported, pointing to dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Might want to find a place to bed down the herd early." Wade nodded. "There's a protected valley about 3 miles ahead. We can make it before the storm hits if we push." They urged the cattle forward, increasing the pace slightly. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Just as they reached the valley Wade had mentioned, the skies opened. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground to mud within minutes. The cowboys worked quickly to settle the cattle, while Clara and Wade scouted the perimeter of the valley to ensure it was secure. They found shelter under a rocky overhang, both soaked to the skin. Wade removed his slicker and tried to arrange it to provide Clara with more protection from the driving rain. "Don't worry about me," she protested. "I'm already wet through." Wade grinned, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. "My mother would turn in her grave if she knew I wasn't being a gentleman." Clara found herself returning his smile before she could think better of it. "Your mother raised a good man, then." The words hung between them, Clara suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his body near hers despite their wet clothes. Wade's eyes darkened slightly as he looked at her, his smile fading into something more intense. "Clara," he said softly, just her name, but filled with meaning. For a moment, Clara thought he might lean closer, might bridge the small distance between them. Part of her apart, she'd thought long dead wanted him to. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Both of them ducked instinctively, Wade pulling Clara further under the overhang. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "Not a chance," Clara countered, pulling her own weapon. They peered out cautiously. Through the curtain of rain, they could see riders approaching the valley, at least 8 of them. "Mercer's men," Clara breathed. They must have been following us all along. Wade's expression hardened. They're after the cattle, not us. If they scatter the herd in this storm, we'll lose half of them at least. Clara's mind raced. The valley has only 2 entrances. If we can get back to the others, set up men at both ends. Wade nodded. It's our best chance. He looked at her, conflict clear in his eyes. Clara, I'd feel better if you stayed hidden here. Clara's spine stiffened. This is my ranch, my cattle, my fight. I'm coming with you. For a moment, Wade looked like he might argue, but then his expression softened into something like admiration. Let's go then. Stay low and follow me. They made their way back through the rain-soaked brush, keeping to cover as much as possible. Gunshots echoed through the valley, and the frightened lowing of cattle rose above the storm. They found Sam and the others already engaged in a firefight with Mercer's men, who were attempting to scatter the herd. "North entrance is clear," Sam shouted when he spotted them. "South is where they're coming in." Wade quickly organized the men, sending 2 to guard the north entrance, while the rest focused on defending the south. Clara positioned herself behind a fallen log, her rifle steady despite her racing heart. The battle was chaotic, visibility poor in the driving rain. Clara fired carefully, aiming to deter rather than kill. She had no desire for blood on her hands, even Mercer's men. One of the raiders broke through their defensive line, heading straight for the main part of the herd. Clara saw him but couldn't get a clear shot through the rain. Wade noticed too, spurring his horse after the man. They disappeared into the mass of frightened cattle, and Clara's heart clenched with fear. A moment later, she heard a shout of pain that sounded like Wade. Without thinking, Clara abandoned her position and ran toward the sound, heedless of the danger. She found Wade on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. The raider was slumped nearby, apparently knocked unconscious. "Wade," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "I'm all right," he grimaced. "Just a graze. Horse slipped in the mud and threw me." Clara quickly tore a strip from her already soaked blouse and pressed it against his wound. "We need to get you to shelter." Gunfire continued around them, but it was becoming more sporadic. Through the rain, Clara could see Mercer's men retreating, having failed to scatter more than a few of the cattle. Sam appeared on horseback beside them. "They're pulling back," he reported, then noticed Wade's injury. "How bad?" "I'll live," Wade grunted, allowing Clara and Sam to help him to his feet. They half-carried Wade to the chuck wagon, which had been positioned in the most sheltered part of the valley. The cook, a grizzled old man named Jasper who had come with Sam's friends, quickly cleared a space. "Let me see," Clara demanded, gently moving Wade's hand from his shoulder. The bullet had indeed just grazed him, but it was a deep furrow that was bleeding freely. Clara cleaned the wound as best she could with rainwater and whiskey from Jasper's personal supply, then bandaged it tightly with clean cloth from her saddlebags. Throughout her ministrations, Wade watched her face, his eyes never leaving hers despite the pain he must have been feeling. "Thank you," he said softly when she had finished. Clara realized how close they were, her hands still resting lightly on his now bandaged shoulder. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice betraying more emotion than she had intended. Wade's hand came up to cover hers. "But I wasn't. Thanks to you." The moment stretched between them, the sounds of the storm and the movement of the others around the wagon fading away. Clara felt drawn to him, the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling despite her best efforts to maintain them. The spell was broken by Sam returning to report that all of Mercer's men had retreated and only 3 cattle had been lost. We should move out as soon as the storm passes, Sam advised. They might come back with reinforcements. Clara nodded, reluctantly drawing away from Wade. Agreed. How soon do you think the rain will let up? Sam glanced at the sky. Another hour, maybe 2. Skies lightening to the west. Clara stood, straightening her soaked clothing with as much dignity as she could muster. I'll check on the men, see if anyone else is hurt. As she turned to leave, Wade caught her hand. Clara, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Be careful. The genuine concern in his eyes made her throat tight. You too, she managed, then slipped away into the rain. As she checked on the other cowboys, making sure none were seriously injured, Clara's mind was filled with thoughts of Wade. The fear she'd felt when she heard him cry out, the relief when she realized his wound wasn't serious, the undeniable connection she felt when their eyes met at all pointed to one conclusion she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Wade Hargrave. The realization should have terrified her. After James, she'd sworn never to trust her heart to a man again. Yet somehow, Wade had slipped past her defenses with his steady presence, his respectful manner, and that smile that asked for nothing in return. By the time she returned to the wagon, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Wade was on his feet, his arm in a makeshift sling, but otherwise looking stronger. The men are fine, Clara reported. A few minor injuries, nothing serious. How are you feeling? Well enough to ride, Wade answered. Sam says the storm's moving east. If we get moving now, we can still make good distance before nightfall. Clara nodded, though concern was evident in her eyes. Are you sure you're up to it? We could rest here longer. Wade's smile was gentle. I'm tougher than I look. And the sooner we get these cattle to market, the sooner we can deal with Mercer properly. Within the hour, they were moving again, the cattle surprisingly cooperative after the excitement of the storm and attack. Clara rode beside Wade, keeping a watchful eye on his injury, despite his assurances that he was fine. They pushed on until dusk, making up for lost time. When they finally stopped to make camp, they had covered nearly 15 miles since the storm, a respectable distance given the circumstances. After a simple dinner around the campfire, the cowboys took turns standing watch while the others slept. Clara found herself unable to rest, her mind too full of the day's events and the revelation of her feelings for Wade. She wandered to the edge of the camp, where Wade was taking first watch despite his injury. You should be resting, she said softly, coming to stand beside him. Wade glanced at her with a small smile. Could say the same to you. The echo of their conversation from the night before wasn't lost on Clara. I can't sleep, she admitted. Too much thinking. Wade nodded, his eyes returning to the darkened landscape around them. Thinking about Mercer? Clara hesitated. Partly, she said carefully, and about other things. Wade looked at her again, his expression curious. What other things? Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. About you, about me, about... She faltered, unused to expressing such feelings. Wade turned to face her fully, his eyes intent in the moonlight. About us? He supplied gently. Clara nodded, dropping her gaze. I never thought I'd trust a man again after James, never thought I'd want to. She forced herself to look up to meet his eyes. But you're different. The way you are respectful, kind, never pushing. That smile of yours that asks for nothing. Wade stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. What does my smile ask for now, Clara? He murmured. Clara's heart raced. Something I'm not sure I know how to give anymore. Wade's hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "You don't have to give anything you're not ready for. I can wait, as long as it takes." The tenderness in his voice, in his touch, broke something open inside Clara, a dam of emotion she'd held back for years. "Wade," she whispered, and then she was in his arms. Her face buried against his good shoulder, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for years finally flowing. Wade held her gently, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort. He didn't try to kiss her or push for more, simply offered the comfort she needed in that moment. When Clara's tears finally subsided, she drew back slightly, embarrassed by her display. "I'm sorry." Wade shook his head. "Don't be. Some things need releasing." Clara looked up at him, seeing nothing but understanding in his eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "afraid to trust these feelings. Afraid they'll lead to more pain." Wade's hand still rested lightly on her waist, warm and steadying. "Fear is natural after what you've been through. But Clara, I promise you this, I will never ever hurt you the way he did. I'd cut off my own hand first." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Clara's breath catch. She believed him, she realized. Despite all her walls and defenses, she believed Wade Hargrave would rather hurt himself than harm her. "I believe you," she said softly, the words a significant concession from a woman who had sworn never to trust again. Wade's smile bloomed, warm and genuine, making the corners of his eyes crinkle in the way she'd come to find endearing. "That's a good start." Clara found herself returning his smile, a small one, but real. It felt strange on her face, this expression of happiness she'd denied herself for so long. Wade noticed, his eyes lighting up. "There it is," he said softly. "Been waiting to see that smile." Clara ducked her head, suddenly shy. "It's been a while since I had reason to." Wade's finger gently tilted her chin up, bringing her eyes back to his. "I aim to give you plenty of reasons, Clara Jensen, if you'll let me." The promise in his words, in his eyes, made Clara's heart flutter. "I think," she began hesitantly, "I think I'd like to try." Wade's smile widened, but he made no move to kiss her, seeming to understand that she needed to set the pace. "That's all I ask, a chance to try." Clara nodded, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through her. "I should try to get some rest," she said, though part of her was reluctant to leave his presence. Wade stepped back, respecting her need for space. "Sleep well, Clara." As she turned to go, Clara impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Good night." "Wade." His fingers closed gently around hers for a brief moment before releasing her. "Good night." Clara returned to her bedroll, her mind still buzzing with the conversation, with the realization that she had taken the first tentative step toward opening her heart again. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Wade's smile, a smile she was finally beginning to trust. The remainder of the cattle drive passed without further incident. Mercer's men did not return, though Clara remained vigilant, half expecting another attack around every bend in the trail. Wade's shoulder healed quickly, and by the time they reached Ellsworth 3 days later, he had discarded the sling, though Clara noticed he still favored that arm slightly. The cattle brought a good price, better than Clara had dared hope. As she tucked the bank draft safely into her pocket, standing on the busy street outside the livestock auction, she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been rare in recent years. "You did it," Wade said, coming to stand beside her, his pride evident. Clara looked up at him. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have managed without you and Sam." Wade smiled, that now familiar expression that never failed to warm Clara's heart. "What now?" head back to the ranch. Clara nodded, but hesitated. First, I need to purchase supplies, and... She glanced down at her trail-worn clothing. Perhaps something new to wear. Wade's smile widened. I could use a trip to the barber myself. Meet back here in 2 hours. Clara agreed, and they parted ways. She toward the general store and dressmaker's shop. He toward the barber. In the dressmaker's, Clara surprised herself by selecting a dress in a soft blue that the shopkeeper assured her brought out her eyes. It had been years since she'd cared about such things, but today, with the cattle sold and the weight of immediate financial worry lifted from her shoulders, she allowed herself this small indulgence. When she emerged onto the street 2 hours later, wearing her new dress and with her hair freshly arranged, she felt almost like a different woman, lighter somehow, as if she'd shed more than just her dusty trail clothes. She spotted Wade waiting by the hitching post where they had agreed to meet. He'd visited the barber as promised, his hair trimmed neatly, his face clean-shaven. He'd also acquired a new shirt and vest, she noticed. When he saw her, he went very still, his eyes widening slightly. "Clara," he said, her name almost reverent on his lips. "You look beautiful." Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks, unused to such open admiration. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Wade offered his arm with a smile. "The others won't be ready to head back until morning. Sam suggested we might enjoy dinner at the hotel restaurant. Would you do me the honor?" Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. "I'd like that." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Ellsworth, with crisp white tablecloths and actual glass windows overlooking the main street. Wade led Clara to a table near the window, pulling out her chair with a gallantry that made her smile despite herself. Over a dinner of roast beef and potatoes, a welcome change from trail food, they talked of lighter things than they had on the journey. Wade told her of his travels, of the strange and wonderful sights he'd seen across the Western Territories. Clara shared memories of her childhood on the ranch, the good times before her parents' passing. As they lingered over apple pie and coffee, Wade's expression grew more serious. "Clara, there's something I need to ask you." Clara's heart quickened. "Yes?" "When we return to the ranch, what happens then? With us, I mean." His eyes held hers, earnest and direct. Clara took a deep breath. It was a fair question, and one she'd been pondering herself. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "This is all new to me, these feelings. After James, I never thought I'd feel this way again." Wade reached across the table to lightly touch her hand. "May I understand? I don't want to rush you, but I also want to be clear about my intentions." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I care for you, Clara, more than I've cared for anyone in a long time. I'd like to stay, if you'll have me, not just as your foreman, but to see where this might lead." The simple honesty of his declaration touched Clara deeply. "I care for you too," she said softly. "More than I thought possible. And yes, I'd like you to stay." Wade's smile was radiant. "That's all I needed to hear." They walked back to the camp under a starry sky, Wade's hand occasionally brushing against Clara's in a way that felt both innocent and thrillingly intimate. When they reached her tent, Wade stopped, taking both her hands in his. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," he said. Clara looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. In his eyes, she saw nothing of the calculation or cruelty that had lurked in James's gaze, only warmth and genuine affection. "Wade," she said softly, gathering her courage, would you kiss me good night?" Wade's expression softened. Are you sure? Clara nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. I'm sure. Wade stepped closer, one hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Then his lips touched hers, soft and warm and achingly gentle. The kiss was brief, sweet, and utterly unlike any Clara had experienced before. When Wade drew back, his eyes were filled with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Good night, Clara, he whispered. Good night, Wade, she replied, her voice slightly tremulous. As he entered her tent, Clara touched her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of his kiss. For the first time in years, she fell asleep with a smile on her face. The journey back to the ranch was markedly different from the drive to Ellsworth. Without the cattle to herd, they made better time, and the mood among the cowboys was jovial. Everyone in high spirits after the successful sale. Clara rode beside Wade most of the way, their conversation easy and comfortable. Occasionally, their hands would brush as they rode side by side, each touch sending a pleasant warmth through Clara's body. They arrived back at the ranch on a golden afternoon 4 days later. The familiar sight of her cabin, the barn, the corrals, all of it filled Clara with a sense of homecoming she hadn't felt in years. Sam and his friends departed after helping to settle things at the ranch, promising to return if Clara ever needed them again. Sam took Wade aside before leaving. And though Clara couldn't hear their conversation, she saw the older man clap Wade on the shoulder with obvious approval. That evening, Clara prepared a simple but hearty meal, and she and Wade ate on the porch, as had become their custom. The spring air was mild, filled with the scent of prairie flowers and the distant lowing of the few cattle they'd kept back from the sale. It feels different, Clara observed, looking out over her land. Coming home this time, Wade followed her gaze. How so? Clara considered the question. Before, this place felt like a burden, a responsibility I had to shoulder alone. Now it feels like home, Wade suggested softly. Clara nodded, looking at him. Yes, home. Wade's smile was gentle. That's how it should feel. They sat in companionable silence as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land. When darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Wade stood reluctantly. I should turn in. Plenty of work to do tomorrow. Clara rose as well, suddenly not wanting him to leave. Wade, she said impulsively, I've been thinking. The barn is no place for my foreman to sleep permanently. Wade looked at her questioningly. What are you suggesting? Clara took a deep breath. There's a small room off the kitchen. My father built it for a ranch hand years ago, but it's been empty since, well, for a long time. She met his eyes steadily. It would be more comfortable than the barn. Wade studied her face. Are you sure? Clara? I don't want to presume anything. Clara nodded. I'm sure. It's proper, separate from my room, but closer. The last word carried more meaning than its simple definition. Wade's smile was understanding. Thank you. I'd be honored. Over the next weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Wade proved himself an excellent foreman, managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch with skill and foresight. Clara found herself free to focus on the financial aspects, planning for the future in a way she hadn't been able to when simply struggling to survive. Their relationship progressed slowly, respectfully. Wade never pushed for more than Clara was ready to give, seeming content with their evening conversations, their occasionally held hands, their good-night kisses that gradually grew less hesitant, more confident. A month after their return, Clara found Wade in the barn late one evening, working on repairing a saddle by lantern light. "You should rest," she said, leaning against the door frame. "That saddle can wait until morning." Wade looked up with a smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I might as well be useful." Clara entered the barn, coming to sit beside him on the bench. "You're always useful. Too useful sometimes. I worry you work too hard." Wade set aside the saddle. "I enjoy the work, especially knowing who I'm working for." The warmth in his eyes made Clara's heart skip. After a month of his steady presence, his unfailing kindness, his gentle courtship, she had come to a decision. "Wade," she said, her voice soft but determined, "there's something I need to say." He turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "I'm listening." Clara took his hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When James died, I thought I'd never trust again, never love again. I was broken in ways I didn't even fully understand." She met his eyes. "But you've shown me that not all men are like him. That kindness doesn't always hide cruelty, that a smile can be genuine, not a weapon." Wade's hand tightened around hers, his expression solemn as he listened. "What I'm trying to say," Clara continued, "is that I love you, Wade Hargrave. I love your kindness, your strength, your patience. I love the way you make me feel safe without making me feel weak." She took a deep breath. "And I'm not afraid anymore." Wade's eyes shone in the lantern light. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've loved you since the day you pointed that revolver at me and told me you sleep with it beside your bed." His smile was tender, reminiscent. "I knew then you were the strongest, most extraordinary woman I'd ever met, and every day since has only proven me right." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you. I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much, if you'll let me." Clara's heart felt full to bursting. "I want that," she whispered. "I want a life with you." Wade cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "Then marry me, Clara Jensen. Be my wife, my partner in everything." Tears pricked Clara's eyes, not tears of sadness or fear, but of joy, of a happiness she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Wade's smile was radiant as he leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with Sam returning to stand as Wade's best man, and the pastor's wife serving as Clara's witness. The townspeople who attended were surprised. Most had assumed Clara Jensen would remain a widow forever, cold and distant as she'd been since James's death. But the woman who spoke her vows that day was transformed, her eyes bright, her smile ready and warm as she looked at the man who had taught her to trust again. The changes at the Jensen Ranch, now the Hargrave Ranch, were visible to anyone who passed by. The fences were mended, the barn repainted, the herd increasing in size and quality each season. But the most remarkable change was in Clara herself. The woman who had once greeted every smile with suspicion now had one of her own, especially when her husband was near. The townsfolk who had whispered about her gradually changed their tune, particularly after Wade confronted Edwin Mercer publicly, exposing his underhanded tactics and forcing him to abandon his campaign of intimidation against the smaller ranchers in the area. A year after their wedding, Clara stood on the porch of their home, expanded now, with Wade's skilled carpentry watching her husband return from checking the herd. She rested her hands on her swollen belly, feeling their child move within her. As Wade dismounted and approached, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did, Clara's smile came easily, naturally a reflection of the joy and trust that now defined her life. "How are my two favorite people today?" Wade asked, climbing the steps to place a gentle hand on her belly. "Restless," Clara replied with a laugh. "Your son seems determined to become a bronc rider before he's even born." "Or daughter," Wade reminded her, leaning down to kiss her tenderly. "Either way, the little one has your spirit." Clara leaned into his embrace, marveling still at how safe she felt in his arms. "And your smile," she murmured. "I hope our child has your smile." Wade's eyes crinkled at the corners as that very smile appeared. "And yours. The one you held back for so long. The one that's the brightest thing in my world." Clara reached up to touch his face, the face of the man who had patiently smiled until she could return it. "I love you, Wade Hargrave." "And I love you, Clara Hargrave," he replied, his arms tightening around her as they stood together in the golden light of the setting sun, their future stretching before them like the endless prairie, wild and beautiful and full of promise. 3 years later, Clara sat on a quilt spread beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek that ran through their property. Her daughter, Emma, now 2 years old, played with a wooden horse Wade had carved for her, while 6-month-old Joseph slept peacefully in a basket nearby. The sound of hoofbeats made Clara look up, smiling as she saw Wade approaching. Emma squealed with delight. Abandoning her toy to toddle toward her father as fast as her little legs would carry her, Wade dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping up his daughter and tossing her gently into the air. Emma's laughter rang out bright and joyous as Wade settled her on his hip and walked toward Clara. "How's my beautiful family today?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Clara softly. "Perfect now that you're here," Clara replied, making room for him on the quilt. "How was the ride to town?" Wade sat beside her, keeping Emma entertained with his watch chain. "Productive. Mail came in. Letter from Sam, he's coming through next month, wants to see the little ones." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small package. "And I got something for you." Clara took the package, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. "Wade, it's beautiful." "Open it," he urged. Inside were tiny portraits, one of Emma and Joseph together, and one of Wade, his smile as warm in the image as it was in person. "So we're always with you," Wade said softly, "even when we're apart." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you." She leaned against him, watching as Emma finally tired of the watch chain and crawled off to retrieve her wooden horse. "I never thought I could be this happy," Clara admitted quietly. "After James, I thought that part of me was dead forever." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I'm grateful every day that it wasn't, that you found the courage to trust again." Clara looked up at him, at the face she loved so dearly. "You made it easy with that patient smile of yours, waiting for me to be ready." Wade's fingers traced her cheek tenderly. "I'd have waited forever for you, Clara." Clara's smile bloomed, as natural now as breathing. "Thank God you didn't have to." As they sat together beneath the cottonwood tree, their children nearby, their land prospering around them, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a woman who could not trust a smile to one whose own came readily and often, especially for the cowboy who had smiled anyway, until she could return it. In that moment, surrounded by the family and love she had once thought forever beyond her reach, Clara knew with absolute certainty that some stories did indeed have happy endings even for those who had stopped believing in them. And when Wade leaned down to kiss her, his smile against her lips felt like the promise it had always been, a promise now fulfilled in the life they had built together, a life that would continue to flourish, season after season, year after year, smile after returned smile.